I guess like an awful lot of people in this business, particularly in ITV, I started in the BBC. I worked in radio and television. I needed a full-time job and I applied for a 6-month contract. I'd never been to Birmingham. This sounds awful now, but I actually had to ring my father and say, how do I get to Birmingham? Found my way here, and on my first morning, one of those things, you know, you never ever forget. I was stood in the newsroom first day, chatting to the new people, and I looked down there and the doors opened and Billy Wright, who was head of sport, 108 caps for England, captain of course of Wolves and England, one of the iconic post-war footballers, walked through, and I thought, wow, Billy Wright. And he walked down the office and he came up and he said, Bob, Billy Wright, heard you were joining us, nice to meet you. And I was like a kid with an autograph, but I went, it was an extraordinary moment, but instantly felt at home. I came here on a 6-month contract, which was all they gave in those days, and it was kind of a big thing because it was the first time I'd gone completely freelance, and I came on a 6-month contract, and you were a newsreader reporter, and rather like, you know, ITN do with the 2 newsreaders, newscasters as they call them, they took 2 of the news reporters and you did a 2-handed newsread. During the day you went out filming. This makes me sound like I'm coming out the ark. It wasn't black and white, let me tell you very quickly. It was colour, but half the cameras were still film cameras. They weren't even video cameras. They were just starting to come in. But these film cameras, bear in mind that when you came back, they had to unload the magazine, put it in the can, put the tape on, write on it. A dispatch rider then went into Hockley, which is probably only about 3 or 4 miles from here, through the traffic, and the processing was done there. It wasn't done on site. And they had to, as you call it, put it through the soute, brought it out the other end, brought it back here, and then you went down. And of course, bear in mind, when you made a cut then, that was it. You couldn't go back like you can with video and change it and do all this. So it was fairly defining stuff, but it was terrific fun. I mean, we just loved it.
When you're making reports, if you're out in the field, do you have any close shaves, you know, too close to transmission, don't get it done in time?
Oh yeah, I mean, that was the great thing. I mean, there were even times, and bear in mind, you know, again, this makes me sound like I'm out the ark, no mobile phones. So if there was any issues, you had to go and find a phone box. And you used to dial the operator and say, can I have a transfer charge call, please? To 0121 643 9898. And then be put through, and you say, ATV, and you say, oh, I've got a transfer charge call, and they just knew it was a reporter ringing, and you say, can you get me the news desk quick? And you get on to them and you say, look, we've been delayed, we've got this, we've got that, and they would quite often send a bike out to take the film from you, so that by the time you got back, the process was underway, because you didn't always do the package reports that everybody do now, because it was just such a different world. That was the thing I forgot to mention. When you'd done a report like that, you didn't then go in a booth and do that, because you were talking about it being on 2 separate tracks. You know, people who know film will know how this works. And it was done on a separate track when you're out in the field if you could, but more often than not you came back, you did the edit, and then you went into the studio and they'd say, this report from Bob Hall. And then the floor manager would cue you and you'd look at the monitor and you'd do the... And bear in mind then, you know, you got to hope that you wrote it as 13 seconds, the gap was 15, but if you were a second late, you could crash it, and it sounds awful, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds like it was 100 years ago. You know, before I came here, despite the fact that I didn't know where Birmingham was or how to get there, I'd done probably nearly 10 years in broadcasting anyway, so I was not too new to it.
Let's for a moment then look back at 18 months ago when Alan Ashman came back from Greece to manage the side for the 2nd time, and we asked him what had decided him to come back to Carlisle after this time.
There was a news editor and a deputy, and there was one other person worked on the news desk, kind of making calls, a bit of a fixer, researcher type of figure. And there were 4 reporters. And the 4 of you, as I said, you did this, going out filming, and then coming back editing it, and then any 2 of you would read the news. My first day, they actually got me in reading the news, and they sort of, new face and all the rest of it. I'd done quite a lot of it before I came here. And bear in mind that ATV Today was presented by Derek Hobson, who presented New Faces, which was then the one of only 2 sort of what you might call sort of reality oblique talent shows of today. So that was Derek's other job. And he and I had worked in radio many years ago, in the days when he had a moustache and wore desert boots, as I used to say to him. He'd become a lot more sophisticated by the time I came and joined him here. regional programs were very much a part of the ethos of the company. You know, they were all individual. There was, you know, ATV, Granada, Yorkshire, Anglia, Southern, etc., etc. So they all had their own, and they all had their airtime to do their own regional programs. And we did a series of things. There was, I mean, I worked on the political program, which was wonderfully called Left, Right and Centre, which kind of made sure that you didn't upset anybody. Dick Taverne, who'd been a Labour MP, fell out of the Labour Party, stood as an independent in Lincoln and did very well there. And then he went into broadcasting. He presented the programme, and I made films for it. And it was really nice because we're talking now about the times of the Troubles in Ulster. So you went over to Stormont and around Belfast with government ministers and things. So it was great stuff to go and do. There was a sort of a somewhere between a current affairs and a bit of a chat show called Right Now that I worked on, which died a death fairly soon, as I recall. Format 5, if you kind of think format and the letter V, put them together, juggle them around, from ATV. Now, isn't that wonderfully original? Well, there we go, Format 5, because people say, what's a good title? Who came up with that? And that was where it came from. And we did films all over the place. I was the reporter on there. It was a weekly current affairs programme fronted by John Edwards, who got a great career in ITV in sort of, you know, politics and fairly heavy current affairs stuff. And I used to do the film. And so we used to go out on a Sunday, film early part of the week and come back. We did kind of everything. We went to Stoke Mandeville, talked to people who were in, you know, went out one night in a bad car accident, ended up in a wheelchair. We went around Europe 2 or 3 times, stories of people who were trying to get work over there and were getting ripped off and so on and so on. So it was a terrific range of things. We went to America, we did the car industry in Detroit, parallel Detroit with Birmingham. And the really nice one we did was we went to Detroit, where Trevor Francis, who'd been the first £1 million footballer when he left Birmingham City for Nottingham Forest, he was playing in the summer in the old NASL. And he was playing for Detroit Express. So we went and did a film with him there, which was really very nice. So those were all, you know, nice range of different programs and things. So they were a lot of fun to do.
If we move to back to sort of you moving more specifically to sport.
Yes.
Was that your decision, or?
I'd always done, you know, right from my early days. I started as a newspaper reporter, as a lot of us did before we moved on. And I used to cover, it was in an area where there was no professional football, so I covered rugby matches and cricket and things. And then when I moved from there on to bigger papers and then into broadcasting, originally with the BBC, and I liked it and thought I knew something about it and wanted to do it. And I kind of just drifted into it. I enjoyed doing all the other things. I enjoyed doing the politics and the documentaries and this, that and the other. But I think probably in my heart of hearts, I always knew that sport was probably going to be the one thing that I would gravitate towards eventually. And it's like so many things, it kind of just happens by accident. There was no time when somebody said, we'd like you to come and do this for us. And in fact, the opportunity here came when they first were splitting Birmingham and Nottingham. So they had to have the same people in both areas. And I came here to work in Birmingham, do sport.
So who was in the team at that time?
In the team, Billy Wright, as I mentioned earlier, being here on my first day, he was head of sport in those days. His deputy was Gary Newborn. The guy who could have kind of ran the ship from an organisational point of view was Trevor East, who became a top executive with ITV, then went to Sky, then to Setanta. And I came in as the reporter. And, I mean, you know, then we had 2 other people who worked as producers. We had 2 secretaries in the office. I mean, you can't believe it, can you? 2 secretaries. So there were about probably 8 of us. And the biggest we ever got to, probably just before, you know, all things fell apart, there were actually 21 people working full-time in sport here. But obviously of that, there was a percentage of time when people were working on network productions and were working in London, as we all did on Champions League and Midweek Sports Special and all the rest of it. But there was a great tie-up with the network because at the time they were doing weekend football, they were doing the Cups, they were doing Midweek Sports Special, On the Ball, and of course the Champions League. So they needed to pull people in. There was one of the guys here was a sort of coordinator for it all, and they just made a list and said, right, this Wednesday night we're going here and here and here. Bear in mind that quite a lot of the games that were done by for the Champions League Live, that the OB, they drove trucks from here into Europe. You know, I don't know how soon before the game they left, probably a week I would think, but they drove all the gear over there, so when you got there everybody you worked with was somebody you knew. Sometimes it wasn't, of course, and language difficulties could be an issue. But bear in mind that in the Champions League, that after a game, the English manager it was a contracted thing, they had to come and give what was called a flash interview. Had to be a minimum of a minute and a half, could be longer if you wanted to. So they effectively came from the dugout straight to you. Some went to the dressing room and then came back. And you did this interview which went all around the world for anybody who wanted a clip of Sir Alex Ferguson or whoever happened to be.
Did you have trouble with any of them?
No, they were really, really good. You know, I've heard all these stories of how Sir Alex Ferguson can be difficult to work with. I never had a moment's problem with him. And it was a bizarre thing. The first time I worked on the Champions League, we were somewhere in northern Spain. I can't even remember where we were. And on the morning of the game, he used to meet with the field producer and the commentator and the reporter. And basically, for all that was ever said, he would tell the ITV commentator what his team was that night. Now, if anybody had ever leaked it anywhere, I imagine they'd have been hung from the nearest gibbet, don't you think? But he trusted the reporter, and he gave him the team so he could do his homework. And the field producer was there just to talk through things. And I remember in the lobby of this hotel, I can't even remember where we were. I'm pretty sure we were in Spain somewhere. And I went along and I was introduced to him, and I had interviewed him before, but probably not things he'd much remember. And he went, oh, and he sort of looked at me and sat down. And I sat opposite end of the coffee table to him, and we chatted about the game and all sorts of other things. We got on to talking about people and their love of red wine. As you probably know, he's got a real taste for red wine. And somebody mentioned a couple of managers who did like perhaps one glass too many. And I just looked up and I mentioned, and I can't mention him, it wouldn't be fair, and I just mentioned somebody who I knew he knew, but really did like a drink, and particularly red wine. And he smiled and he went, have you got 5 minutes? And I said, yeah. Waiter, cappuccino and black coffee. You others can go. And they all looked slightly surprised and went off. And he came and sat by me, and we talked about this manager and also, and we just sat and talked. And I suddenly realised, like, I've been here nearly an hour. And anyway, then we split up and off he went. When I got to the game at night, I'd gone down on the touchline to check where I was sitting and all the rest of it. And it was probably an hour and a half before the kick-off. And he was there and he came, Bob, how are you? I said, oh, I'm fine. And he just started chatting about all sorts of things. I don't think we even talked about football. My mobile phone went, and I said, excuse me. He said, oh, no problem. I said, hello. And it was the producer. He said, Bob, it's producer. I said, yeah. You okay? I said, yeah, why? He said, is there a problem? Because he's a very animated talker, and he tended to do this a bit. And he said, I thought he was out. I said, no, we're just chatting. It's okay. And I put the phone back. Anyways, where were we? And he came back. And we just sort of, developed this bond that now I can still ring him up and set things up with him. Brian Clough, yes. Good friend with him again. What is it with me with these people who are supposed to be difficult to deal with? I don't know. Always got on very well with him. Always. Had a spat with him once. Now there's a famous occasion, and I know ITV's got the footage because I was there. It was a midweek game. Nottingham Forest played Queen's Park Rangers in a football league, the old League Cup. Trevor Francis was manager of Queen's Park Rangers. And I said to the cameraman, because he was up in the gods and I was sitting in the press box, I said, at the end of the game, I just want you to follow Brian Clough because he'll walk down to the dugout and shake hands with Trevor Francis. And he was a nice guy, good cameraman, but he didn't really know his sport very well. And he went, yeah, okay. So I said, you're fine with that? He said, yes. Now, I know Nottingham Forest, I think they won 6-2, as I recall. And Lee Chapman scored a hat-trick. And during the game, he kept seeing from the dugout this green sleeve of Clough's wagging finger. And I had to leave about 10 o'clock to go back to the studios to do an edit for Midweek Sports Special. And I said to the cameraman, as soon as you get out, bring the tape back, I will be in this edit suite. So I'm sitting there, and it was the days when you spool through the tapes, and I'm saying, 62 minutes, 10 seconds, find it. There we are, we're putting all this together. And it was about 20 past 10, so we hadn't got much time. And the door opened, and the cameraman came in. He goes, I've got that. I said, oh, brilliant. I said, did you get that shot? No. I said, oh, why not? He didn't shake hands with him. I said, oh, well. I said, have you got something of him? Yes. Fine, thanks. There's something you might want to know. And, you know, it's your worst fears at that moment, isn't it? Oh, God, what's happened? I said, what happened? He said, well, you started hitting people. I said, who did? He said, Brian Clough. He was that guy in the green jumper. So I said, yes. So I looked at the editor, he looked at me, tape out, whacked it in, spun it back, and he obviously saw it going back the other way. And he walked down the touchline. It's a well-documented story. He walked down the touchline, almost to the dugout. Trevor Francis wasn't actually there. And about 4 fans, Nottingham Forest fans, came jumping on the pitch doing all this. And Cloughie's there, and he just starts hitting him. Now, if you look at that shot, there's a policeman stood there, and he's like this. And he sees what's going. He just turned his back. And so there is this moment where Cloughie hits them. So I said to the guy, right, drop that bit, put this in. Picked the phone up, rang Thames, green room please. Trevor East was producing. Picked up the phone, he goes, green room. I said, Trevor, it's Bob. Hey up. I said, okay, what you're leading on, drop it. What's happened? So I told him. He went, okay, just saying. I just heard him call across to somebody. We're changing the opening. Tell Elton Wellesby was presenting the programme then. And did this package, and as we sent it down, they're saying after the advertisements, Midweek Sports Special. So it was as tight as that. Played it down to London. So I sat there with the editor, and the cameraman had stayed. Midweek Sports Special rolled. Elton Wellesby said, tonight, the story that you'll see on your back pages tomorrow. Brian Clough, Nottingham Forest manager, not content with his team winning 6-2, attacked some fans. Extraordinary scenes at the City Ground. Bob Hall was there, and they played this. So you can imagine the reaction. On the Friday morning, the Sun back page, I offered to quit by Brian Clough, exclusive. The following day, I was at Nottingham Forest for ATV Central, whichever it was. I parked my car, I'm going across the car park, and I see Brian Clough just getting out of his car. I thought, I need to walk a long way around him so he doesn't see me. So all these kids running for autographs, and he's starting to sign them. And I don't know, you know, it's like a sixth sense thing. He turned, and he went, hey, Robert, come here. He would never abbreviate anybody's name, you know. Players called Teddy were Edward, players called Chris were Christopher, and so on and so on. Robert, come here. So I walked across. I'm going to fall out with you. I said, why is that, Brian? I won't say what he said, but he said, you know well why I'm going to fall out with you. You've got me into a lot of trouble because the FA fined him £10,000. I said, I didn't get you into trouble. You got yourself in. Don't split hairs. I said, well, come on, Brian, it's a fact. £10,000. I said, now, yesterday's Sun exclusive. I know they paid you £12,500. So you're £2,500 in profit. I always knew I liked you. Come in and have a drink, he said. It was classic Cloughie. That was how he was. And just one other very quick one. At a dinner where he got an award in Birmingham, they brought him into a room not unlike this one. Lots of people. He said at the camera. And he walked in and he said, how are you, Robert? I said, I'm very well, Brian. He said, can I just tell you something before we start? And you can imagine the room just fell silent. For someone of very limited ability, you've had a very good career. And I just laughed, and he said, and that was a compliment, and you know it was. And I said, yes, I do, Brian. My father was a Tottenham Hotspur fan, and Jimmy Greaves was one of his heroes. So I remember saying to him once, oh, ITV have got a football contract. Jimmy Greaves is going to be working with us. And it was interesting how he got that, first got onto television. He was publishing, they were publishing in paperback the book called This One's on Me, the story of his descent into alcoholism. And he had a perm in those days. I mean, if you can find a picture, it's a cracker. And he came into ITV, it was before I'd come back here, and to plug his book. And they were doing an interview. And just that sort of, you know, how he was. Because when you saw Greavesy on screen, and he was so good, he did what's the hardest thing in the world, that's to be natural. Because the instinct is when you're on there, this is a performance, now I'm going to speak to you, you're listening, you know, you would adopt a persona. Greavesy was just, well, hello mate, here I am. And you'd be sitting watching a game sometimes on a Saturday, if I hadn't gone to a game and I was watching one here, and you'd be watching it and go, tell you what mate, see here, and he'd tell you something tactically. He's got to get him off or move him here and do that, and you go, all right, okay. It was like Richie Bennett could talk about cricket like that. He's going to change ends, change the bowlers. And with Greaves, and then 30 seconds later, they'd make the change. And you think, wow, fancy knowing that. But he was just a delight to work with. Absolute delight. I mean, he was... People used to want to come in and meet him and sign things. If anybody go, oh, legend. You saw Jim's hackles rise. He didn't want anybody to call him that. He didn't want anybody to treat him any differently. All through my career, I've always been fascinated by politics. I've worked for the BBC Politics show. I've done politics in lots of ITV regions. And the one thing when I was doing sport full time that I really, really missed was general election night. Just something about it. And leading up to this, you got sort of sent off to see people, and when there were by-elections and everything. But I mean, I remember specifically they did a really big splurge here and in the studio, and they got cameras tracking and all sorts, and there were stacks of us looking as though we were doing things. Truth to tell, there was no results coming in at that stage, but it was just being around it, being at the count and all the rest of it. And I've been very lucky over the years that I'd been quite close to quite a lot of, you know, fairly senior politicians in covering their election results. I mean, it's going back a few years, but people remember people like David Steele and Willie Whitelaw and Alan Beath and people like that. And it was just always being around it. There was something, you know, I know nowadays, what is it, 33% of people vote. I mean, then it was probably nearer 50. But it was still, you know, people's lives, careers, futures and everything were on the balance. And just being around it, it was terrific. I mean, in '79, I don't actually remember where I went, but they used to send you to places where either there was a really big name or there was a possibility of a swing. And they were still called the Liberals in those days. And there were always times when there was a chance of an upset. But it was one of those things, send me for a political upset, and it didn't happen. That was always the case. More recently, I get football managers sacked. I've been to so many, done interviews for another broadcaster, and the following day, that night, half an hour later or whatever, the manager gets sacked. I actually did 4 in 5 weeks 2 seasons ago. So it's kind of a bit of a warning to managers to steer clear. But I'd done my first stint here. I was here for about 3-4 years, I think it was. And I just really was kind of looking around for something else. And I got asked to go to Manchester and do an audition for Open Air, which was one of the early sort of daytime programmes. Bob Wellings was on it, and Valerie Singleton and Gloria Hunniford and what have you. And I did audition for that, and I was offered to go and work on it, but I think it was 2 days a week, and I was trying to see how I was going to work out the pattern. When I got a phone call offering me the chance to go and present Pebble Mill at 1, which I did, which was an awful lot of fun. But that was kind of coming to an end, really. And I got a phone call absolutely out the blue. I can't even remember where I was working now. And it was from Gary Newbon. And he said, look, as you probably know, in the new year, they're going to change the whole system within ITV. There'll be a studio and a setup in Birmingham and one in Nottingham. And Nick Owen was here then. He said, Nick's going to go and be the reporter presenter in Nottingham. I'd like you to come back here. Now, I'd done bits and pieces for sport, but never on a full-time basis. So I was, yeah, great. So we met up and talked about it. And, I mean, it was a kind of a defining moment. I mean, I know that Nottingham then didn't go on air for 2 years because of all the union issues. But ATV disappeared and Central started. And in the space of, I don't know, it seemed like about 4 or 5 years, the logo and the ID and all the rest of it completely changed. But it was a whole new era. It was becoming the digital era, you know, and certainly with video cameras and all the other bits and pieces that were part and parcel of it. So it was a very exciting time, and as I say, from my point of view, you got to work in sport full time.
So here we go, Central Sport with Bob Hall.
Thanks very much. And the big FA Cup news tonight is that 2 Coventry City players have been dropped from tomorrow's 3rd round cup tie with Sheffield Wednesday, and they've been fined 2 weeks' wages each for breaking a New Year's Eve curfew. The players are both strikers, Gary Thompson, who's just signed a new 3-year contract, and Tom English, who regained his place in Coventry's attack only last week. We understand that both players have been disciplined for breach of club rules while Coventry's Cup squad was spending the New Year's Eve night in a local hotel. So it means that Coventry will take on Sheffield Wednesday with only one recognised striker in Mark Haitley in their side. But the club's executive manager, Gordon Milne, said this afternoon, it's no good preaching discipline if you don't practice it.
Richie Woodall wants to fight Welshman Joe Calzaghe in May or June to unify the WBC and WBO super middleweight titles. Woodall retained his title against the Italian Vincenzo Nardiello. It's emerged that Calzaghe didn't break his hand, as had been feared during his defence of his title, so only demands for a rematch with Robin Reid could delay him fighting Woodall. For now, though, Telford's world champion, as you'd expect, is taking it easy. Start with football tonight. Birmingham City are back in relegation trouble following defeat at Tottenham, and it was a calamitous goalkeeping error that led to their latest setback, as Mark Bolton reports. I remember Bob Warman and I, when we were playing our last of the summer wine parts, you know, just sitting and talking about it. And I think we probably had the best of it. I think that from maybe mid-70s to mid-90s, it's a long time. There was change. Nothing was ever going to be the same again once they put that satellite in the sky to get television. But as I said in another bit, that people like to feel a local connection. People would say in Birmingham, "What are you doing stories in Stoke for?" From Stoke's Manchester, Stoke's Liverpool. And you know, similarly around the region, people would have that view. But we had the best of times, I think. It was the fun time. It was the live hard, it was the play hard. People would not believe, you know, when I first worked at the old building round the corner, there was a bar at the end of the canteen. There was a bar 50 yards away, and you went out the front door, turned right, and there was another bar there. They weren't open 7 till 10. They were open from 11 o'clock. Certain people, when you couldn't find them, oh, he'll be gone to Studio 3. We all knew what that meant. But people did that. People smoked. Half the people in the office smoked. You walked in and, you know, there it was. Now people go, what? I was talking to a teenager the other day saying about something and smoking. And I said, you know, people used to smoke on the top deck of a bus. What? Really? Looked in amazement at me. But people did. Half the people in an office smoked. And some of them smoked a pipe and some of them smoked cigars. You open the door, you know, where is everybody? But that was how it was. And it's like 12 people went to shoot something that you needed 2 people. They were the best of times, and it's not being a dinosaur about it. It's not saying, like it was in my day, lad, because so many of the things are better, and you know, the communication and the way things are done and the way you can use technology now. Way better than it ever was. And you look back at the quality, the early digital quality from a camera, and you think, oh, wow, you know. Have you ever actually got that in focus? Yeah, that's all the pictures look like that. So from that point of view, it's very, very different. And it is way better now. But I suppose if there's one thing that kind of changes it, you could walk through a lot of these rooms and you could be in a building society or any office anywhere, because that's how it is. It's people at computers. The fun has gone, except when you do something like this.